Hi, welcome to Real Life Theology. I'm Renée Sproles, and today we are going to talk about 10 reasons not to homeschool your children, which sounds like an odd topic, but we think we'll explain more later. So first of all, I just want to give some statistics on homeschooling. There's some interesting statistics, especially during COVID. There was a lot of people, moving to the home. So the National Home Education Research Institute, in an article published in January of this year, 2021, noted the following. There's an estimated 4 to 5 million homeschooled students in grades K to 12 in the United States. That's 7 to 9% of school-age children. And I just heard a news story this morning on The World and Everything in It that's likely higher, that based on the numbers they're saying of people exiting regular schools during COVID and who say they're going to stay out. So there's probably new numbers coming soon. A demographically wide variety of people homeschool. This was really cool. The Department of Education found in 2019 that 41% of homeschool students are Black, Asian, Hispanic, and others, non-white. That's a lot. Homeschooled students typically score 15 to 30 percentile points above public school students on standardized achievement tests. And they participate in community service more. They vote and attend public meetings more frequently. They go to and succeed at college at an equal or higher rate than the general population. And by adulthood, they internalize the values and beliefs of their parents at a higher rate, which is probably why a lot of people are considering homeschooling, that last fact. So let me introduce our guests today. We have Karen Costello. Karen began homeschooling in 1983 when it was illegal in Tennessee and taught her 4 children for the next 34 consecutive years. She's just a little bit of experience. She's the author of 2 books, Go Fly a Kite, which was featured in World Magazine, and Go Light a Fire. And although she has raised a doctor, a nurse, an accountant, and her last one who just graduated college has gotten married, she cannot balance her own checkbook and is queasy at the sight of blood. I love this fact. Welcome, Karen.
So privileged to be here. Thank you, Renee.
You're welcome. And this is Holli Turner. Holli has a bachelor's of science in nursing and worked for 7 years as an RN before she and her husband decided that they would stay at home and homeschool their children. And her husband, Daryl, is her best friend, biggest cheerleader, and they have 2 daughters and a son. She's currently homeschooling.
Yes.
Been homeschooling for, you said, 8 years?
Yes, I think this is our 8th year.
Yeah. They live in Middle Tennessee, and they're active members of a local church. And Holli has a passion for applying God's word to everyday situations, especially the cultural lies that target girls and women of all ages. She loves to talk about wellness, holistic wellness, apologetics, historical fiction, and homeschooling. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
So, okay, top 10 reasons not to homeschool. Number 1, do not homeschool if you value a lot of free time. Tell us about that, Karen. You've done it for 34 years.
Well, really, it's what you are doing, Renee, is wonderful. You are asking these families who are brave, who are looking at making this step, to count the cost. And you cannot add homeschooling just as one more ministry in a busy life. You cannot. You need to give up eating lunch out with your girlfriends, shopping, daytime Bible studies. There will be time later. And even though my time was a lot longer than I have planned, I do have time to do things now. But this devotion to your children needs to be a top priority. So it's worth it in the end to sacrifice the short term for the long-term vision and goals that you have.
Yeah, I love you said that because that was exactly what I was fantasizing about when I was home with 2 small children. And I was thinking, Starbucks, 3 more years till Starbucks with my girlfriends. And then we decided to homeschool, and it was no Starbucks with the girlfriends for another good 12, 13 years. So yeah, it really is your full-time job. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I like what you said about like daytime Bible studies and things like that. I, for several years, tried to order my day around this women's Bible study because I felt like I needed to do that for myself. And it just never would work. And finally, one day I was like, feeling guilty about not being able to be a part of this Bible study. And then it was like, God was like, but you're doing the work where you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to have time for that. Just focus where you are. And, you're learning by teaching your kids. So.
Yes. Yes. So true. So true. Okay. Number 2, ladies, don't homeschool if you're not willing to consider this your new career or your job. Talk to us, Karen.
Well, I would say one of the best things that I had to learn on the job, because it's not easy for me to do, was to say no to outside ministries. Because honestly, those of you who are considering it, or those pastors who are watching this who will be counseling families that are going to start homeschooling, people at church and in the neighborhood look at you and go, oh, she doesn't work, so she can head up the neighborhood, whatever, the church ministry, because you're already a busy woman. And you really have to just say no, unless God is calling you as a family to do things. And I think we'll talk about that in a little bit, about doing things as a family, because I've seen that work really well when families are called to ministries. But yeah, you just got to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us about that. You left a great job, probably a really fulfilling job. Did you think of it as a new career for you?
I left the job before I started homeschooling because my husband and I always wanted someone to be at home. So even when I was working as a nurse and he was working as a nurse, we set our schedules to where someone was always at home with our oldest daughter. And so when I finally left that job to just be at home with her, it was a change. But then when we kind of fell into homeschooling, we talk now about how we're so thankful that God has allowed me to be able to stay home with them and to continue to homeschool, even though that's not really the reason that we set out to do it. Mm-hmm. It just became like the avenue through which we were able to continue to do it. And it's been really good. And I have had people say, well, what do you do all day? And I think like, well, I teach my children, I parent my children, I take them places. They go everywhere I go. We get complimented all the time at doctors' offices about how well behaved they are. And I'm like, they've been doing this since they were babies. Like, they go where I go, and we do school wherever we go. So yeah.
Yeah, it really is a beautiful way of life. It is really that Deuteronomy 6, like, as you go along the way, teach your children as you go out and as you come in. And it's such a beautiful way of life. And you really can consider it like a career. I mean, it's just the stakes are even higher because you're talking about your children, your family, and you can do the research, go to the conventions, and glean wisdom from other professionals who are doing this. This is why we're talking to you all. So yeah, it really is a career. It really is a job. You need to consider it your job. So if you're not going to do that, don't homeschool. All right, number 3, don't homeschool if you have a difficult relationship with your child. Yeah, talk to us about this, Karen.
That is a hard one. I mean, I can see both sides of that over the years. Homeschooling is not a magic formula to make there be wonderful harmony in your family, because it is incredibly hard. And yet, if you have a difficult relationship with that child, that needs to be your number one prayer need. You need to be on your knees asking God for tools to make that better anyway. And I have seen God use the crucible of home education to solve some of that. I'm now a marriage and family therapist. So part of me says, if it's a difficult child, what if part of the difficulty is they feel left out because you're sending them to school every day, all day. And the only time you have with them is to reprimand and to, nag them about homework. And so I will say this, that in the course of homeschooling, I know Renee has seen this over her many years, that there will be years where children are difficult. And I love telling this story because when our oldest was 13, he was majoring in eye rolling at his mother's corniness and cheesiness. I mean, that is just what he did, was roll his eyes at how corny and cheesy his mom was. And so about that time, I met a young girl, and she was like, "Oh, Karen, I couldn't homeschool. I bet every day your homeschool is just so much fun." And I was like, "Oh, why don't you ask my 13-year-old? Okay, just why don't you ask him how much fun our homeschool is every day?" And then this is really, I was there when she asked him. She was like, "Oh, Will, does your mom make homeschooling fun every day?" And I really thought he would just crack up laughing, like, "You got to be kidding me." And he paused and he said, "Well, not every day." And then I fell out of my chair because I just thought he was hating everything about it, and, thinking he's been punished with a mom who would choose to homeschool. But they just, teenage boys in particular would probably not rather be, memorizing some Bible passages and, going through algebra, 2. Come on, let's get real and get algebra 2. So anyway, just to say that, press through. You moms, ask for God's guidance. If this is something that you need to go to counseling about, how about that? Go to family counseling, and then possibly look at homeschooling. But there really is not a perfect formula for a homeschool to fix that relationship. God's got to do it. I talked too long. I'm sorry.
No, that's not too long. I just love hearing your perspective, and you've done it really in 2 seasons of life, because you had 3 that you did, and then you had a little one come along. So you've done it 3 times. She knows like 3 times as much as us. But what I see, my husband and I, we teach a parenting class, have for 20 years, taught it just so we'd learn it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Now the kids are raised and we feel like we have a little bit of street cred, but we see these families where the parent and the child really do butt heads, and they don't have any kind of responsiveness from the heart of their child. The child does not respond to them in obedience.
Right.
Like to put the horse before the cart, like really press in prayer, seek out some help, and
Yes.
Ask for wisdom. Like, how do I parent this child? How do I reach the heart of my child? And that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thought that homeschooling could be a tool to do that. I just see some of these families come through our class, and I think that would be a disaster. Like, your kid won't even come when he's called, ever.
Whoa. Wow.
So how are you going to teach him to read or teach him letters? First things first. And so the thought that absolutely certain years are hard, and you don't just stop because they're hard. Absolutely not. Especially those awkward, like preteen years or the eye roll years, as you said. So do you have any thoughts on that, Holli?
Yeah, I have an almost 13. My oldest is almost 13. And then I have a middle, the 2 older girls, and the younger girl is 9. And then I have an almost 5-year-old little boy. So we have a little bit of a gap, and he's like, super, he's fun right now. He loves to come and sit and listen at the table, and he's learned things that I didn't even know that he knew until, for instance, the other day, he recited the Bible memory passage that my girls are working on. I didn't even know he knew it, but he was like, "Oh yeah," and he just said it. But yeah, the 2 older, like, I know that 13-year-old kind of area sometimes is hard for me because I don't have any siblings. So sibling things are probably the hardest thing for us. And, with them being at home all the time, it's different. They're together. They have to learn relationship things. We have to learn relationship things, and they are different. We have some harder times with one when the other is sort of easy, and it just seems to flip flop that way. And my husband are like, oh, we just got through this hard part and now we're doing hard stuff with the other. I'm like, okay, what do we do? But yeah, lots of prayer and asking other people, like, how do we deal with this? You know, because it's the first time for us with two different personalities in our house, really.
Yes. Yes. Which leads us to number 4, which is don't homeschool if you think all kids learn the same way. So do all kids learn the same way, Karen?
They do not. They do, but I didn't know that. I mean, I was majored in high school at secondary education, and then I'm teaching my kiddos again back when, I mean, it really was illegal when we started. We did work with some other families in Tennessee, and then it became legal. So that was wonderful. But yeah, the first child was a visual learner, just textbook visual learner, but I didn't know what that was. So then I thought child number 2 would be a visual learner. Totally not. He was an auditory learner. And then our daughter came along and she was kind of left brain, bright brain, and that was great. But then the last one, this is just the funniest story because, again, you would think by then I would kind of have gotten a clue. And so I'm exactly like Holly, that I love doing memorizing Bible passages. Love it, love it, love it. And so we were memorizing, again, just me and my one kiddo now. And so he would stand up. We sat on a couch. He would stand up and pick up a couch cushion and start zipping and unzipping while he was memorizing. It was just super annoying, right? I'm just like, hey, can you stop doing that zipping and then just tell me the Bible passage? And he had a problem with getting the words right when he wasn't zipping and unzipping. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. I have a kinesthetic learner. I have one that has got to be fooling with Legos or clay or something. And so we did. So on my last one, I learned a whole new learning style. So yes, go in prepared to be surprised at how your kids learn, and definitely memorize. I grew up memorizing chapters and passages, like doable. And I do know that is exactly how our kiddos were, that they are picking up the word of God before you even know they are. That is a beautiful thing. And so I would encourage everybody thinking about doing this. Don't memorize a verse, tack it onto some context.
Oh, beautiful. I know. My son, we're homeschooling. I'm feeling like we're doing great. His Sunday school teacher in 5th grade challenged them to memorize the book of James. The book of James. And I was thinking, okay, that's really hard. Well, you know what? Boys love a little competition. And it was like, who can do it faster? And he knocked that out. It took him several months, but he was competing with a little friend, and they just spurred one another on to love and good deeds, as the Bible says. And so, yeah, it's sometimes we don't challenge our kids enough. I think I thought I was challenging them enough, but they could do even more. So, and yes, can you use all the same curriculum for all your kids? No. This is such a bummer to find out, right?
We thank God there are so many, though. It can be overwhelming. And that's the first thing that I tell people when they ask me about homeschooling. I'm like, there is way more out there than you need. Like every year I would pray about curriculum and God would tell me to simplify. Yeah. And every year I would get so much blessing out of doing less, but doing what worked. And I think we have been through, I learned the same lesson with the different learning styles. I had no idea about that when I went into homeschooling. And about the 2nd year with my oldest, I was like, what in the world? Like, why are we butting heads all the time? And I found about learning styles, and I realized that she doesn't learn like I do. And I was teaching her like I learn, and it didn't make sense. And so I learned what she was. And then I knew when my second, I was like, okay, I know I got to do the learning style thing. And she's completely different. She likes to move and memorizing. We do multiplication flashcards. She stands up and does like this the whole time. And it's just, she's in 3rd grade. I'm just now realizing that she needs to move, even though I knew that. And yes, I think we've been through 4 math curriculums and 3 language arts curriculums. And I think we have finally like found our place.
Yep. Yep.
You know, but then I have this 4-year-old who's, you know, we're going to see how this stuff works with him, because I think I've used 3 different ways of teaching them to read, because the first one didn't work with my second. The second one won't work with him because he picks up things really quickly. And so he's already asked me to teach him to read. So now,
fun. Which is one of the funnest things.
yes. Yeah.
Wow.
It is like,
Great.
it is exhilarating. You're making me remember this. Like teaching your kid to read. Like,
I know. I was like, okay, now I got to do
magical.
this again. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, and we did my kinesthetic learner. We had a mini trampoline during read aloud. Honey, how many calories did that child burn during read alouds? He bounced and bounced and bounced.
So good.
It's so fun. It's such fun family memories, and it's so flexible. He couldn't do that in a classroom.
Yeah, no.
Bounce on a trampoline.
Mm-mm.
Or sit still.
Or sit still
the whole time to learn. Like, that's not going to work.
Okay, so number 5, don't homeschool if you're not willing to live with a messy house. At least sometimes messy house.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, like I don't know y'all well enough to know how much this would matter to you. It mattered a lot to me. Glitter, science projects, just papers everywhere, you know, like sometimes I would get really stressed about that. It's not, you don't need to have that expectation. Talk to us, Karen.
Well, I always say that a homeschool environment, it's a learning laboratory where learning is always taking place. So it's just crazy to put everything back up. Now, in the early days, when we were kind of like, Renee, you are so wise to do something like this. But I was like, there's not enough people homeschooling. I want more people to homeschool. So it was kind of like I was talking people into it, which that did not work. But that I would say, oh, you don't have to have a schoolroom. Just do it on your dining room table. And I'm telling you, I don't say that anymore, because this is what I truly believe. If we are changing our lifestyle to make this commitment and devotion to training the next generation, then that needs to be a designated spot. Now, does it need to be a perfect schoolroom? Absolutely not. But you don't need to say, okay, now we've done school, now let's eat and clear everything away. If you can have a designated space, I think that's real important. So.
Yeah. What about you, Holly? How's your house?
Well, one thing that I did learn, and my husband, he takes credit for this, but he encouraged me a lot. I am not like a scheduled, stick to my, like a scheduled all through my day kind of person. I just never have been. I do have a structure and an order to things, but I don't live by the clock. But he would say, you need to like give them like a schedule for the day. And I would just be like, oh no,
Joy comes
I'm like, no, and finally one year my oldest lives by checklists, and so I made her like this is what you have to get done on a daily basis. And then this is what you get done. And it has no times to it, that just gives them order, but chores, like that was the biggest thing. Like I realized this the other day. I finally sat down and just did morning, evening, like chores. I split their chores up, gave them something to do. They know that they do these chores, they do their schoolwork, they eat lunch or whatever, they do their afternoon chores. And when all of that is done, then they have free time to do whatever. So they're not asking me 100 times to do stuff. And I think this is our 3rd year that I finally sat down and did that. And I was just last night was like, this is so nice. Like my house like stays orderly and cleaner because I'm not doing all the work. They're doing their They clean bathrooms, they do laundry. Like I don't have piles of laundry all the time. Sometimes we do, but we, But yeah, I mean, my husband comes home from work some days and he's like, wow, he'll walk in the door and he's like, whoa, what happened here? And I'm like, this is a sign of a good day. When there are toys everywhere, that means that fun was had and learning happened.
Yes.
And
Yes.
And they had fun. And they just haven't had time to clean it up. And he's always like, hey, that's good with me. But some days he just walks in and he's like, wow, what happened here? I'm like, fun. That's what happened.
That's so good. Yes. So yeah, you can't have a perfect house, but you can't have an orderly house. That's a good point. Yeah, you learn some rhythms, and they learn so much from managing their time. Like instead of being told hour by hour where to be, like in a regular school day. All right, number 6. Don't homeschool if you're not willing to go out into the community for activities, field trips, friendships. This one is because I've read some, homeschool testimonies of people who are adults who are like, my parents just kept us at home all the time. We never got involved in the community. It felt like indoctrination. Like we didn't, it wasn't really involved in the world. And that's not what we're looking for either. Can you speak to that, Karen?
Well, obviously, you're exactly right. We're going for well-roundedness. If we chose homeschooling just because the chances are greater that we can create a genius, which is true, but they're just not able to socially get along or serve people or know the Lord or, serve elderly people, then we have failed, right? I mean, we really have. So, yeah, we need to always go for well-roundedness as God is speaking, because homeschool families are very, very different. But so as you hear God leading, I'm so in agreement. We need to get our kids involved in service, because otherwise, if our kids get the message that, oh, wow, mom gave up her career to sit home and teach us, we must be pretty special and entitled. Again, we've got to say this is a God-given privilege. And so we're going to give back, and we're going to pray about places of ministry. So I definitely believe we should be involved in service, and that tends to take a back burner, especially as the kids get older, because we all, and y'all will agree with me, we're all that specter of, are we doing enough? Do we need to fill in some more gaps? Should we do another tutorial? Should we do another play an instrument? And so we've got to tell that voice to be quiet and say, if we don't teach our children to serve, it will not be worth it. And so the other thing I would say about field trips, which I love, especially in the younger ages. I mean, I just think you need to do field trips all the time, but y'all need to know who is listening. I know my friends here know, but as the number of kids on a field trip increases, the effectiveness of the learning on that field trip decreases. And it's just a fact of life. If we've got 20 little kids going to Hatcher's Dairy, they're going to be playing, they're going to be goofing off, they're going to be trying to be fun. And so if you can keep your field trips relatively small, the learning efficiency goes up. So
that's so wise. So wise. I remember when we moved from Tennessee to Indiana, there were so many cool, different places that we could see as we homeschooled. And you're right. When we went, just the 3 of us, me and my 2 children, it was such a rich learning experience. And I had good friends in North Carolina who I loved. They were such great field trip planners, and so I would rely on them some. But when you bring a bunch of friends along, you're right. It gets distracting. So that's a good little nugget of wisdom. So out in the community, y'all are out. You were in the car yesterday when I called you.
Yeah. We as a family, we try to limit the number of activities that our children are involved in, and they know this. We are not going to be in the car every day, all day, going to activities. If they want to try a sport, then we are all for trying a sport one at a time. We're not going to play softball and soccer and whatever at the same time. And they know that if they want to try something new, they have to give up something. And if they don't want to give up softball or whatever that they like, then they don't try new things because we've set that rule. We have someone who does art. So we have like an art and an extracurricular activity. And we try to keep them like that because we don't want to be super busy, but we do also want them to be out doing things and meeting other people, like you said. And some people have said, well, homeschoolers are trying to shelter their kids from everything. And my husband and I are like, no, we're not. We are trying to control the exposure to the things because we're their parents, and we want them to have a solid biblical foundation before they go out into the world. And then we're going to control what they're exposed to when they're ready for it. And we're going to be the ones to talk to them about stuff. And so, yes, our daughters, have participated in sports with kids from everywhere, kids that go to church, don't go to church, go to school, don't go to, are homeschooled. We don't just stick with church activities or just stick with homeschooled activities. We let them be a part of various different things so that they do learn how to interact with people. And
yeah, and you're right about the balance. Like I loved the amount of time at home we were able to have with our children. That after 3 o'clock, when everybody's running around to their activities, if we had art class, we'd already been. We went to the 1 o'clock art class, and we're home. It's a nice balance. But we were out in the community. But when Dad was home, we were home, and that was beautiful. Okay, we are on number 7. Don't homeschool simply because you're afraid of junior high or high school and all the peer pressure and issues that brings. I don't know about you, Karen, but in our tutorial that I helped launch, I saw this a lot in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
What happens?
Yeah, I agree. And I taught a tutorial for 20 something years, but I saw the same thing. It's like, I want to, protect my kiddos, and I'm scared. There's already been a little damage. Y'all fix this child, right? And so fear is never a good motivator, honestly, for much of anything, right? But I will say this, that as more and more people hear about homeschooling, and I'm certain this last year with COVID, that as we launch into high school, specifically 9th grade, because those of us know that's when the transcripts count. That's if you are praying and you would like your child to be college prepared, that makes a difference. And you really need to look at it and count the cost again. Like, even though, let's say you've homeschooled from 1st grade on, you need to recommit, repray, and say, is this the best venue for each child that we have? Because there's no cutting corners. There's not, let's just say this. I love what she said about fun was had today. And I really did try to find something every day that was fun, but there's less fun from 9th grade on because of this transcript. And again, that's part of their being prepared to manage their own time, to be self-studied, to be a lifelong learner, like we all are, right? We are all still lifelong learners. And so there has to be some of that adult thing. But I want to encourage those who are looking at just homeschool and high school to really pray and really count the cost, because it's a different animal.
Yeah, it really is. And that's what I saw too, is that people got afraid. There was some bullying going on, some bad things happening in high school, and they pulled them out, which is not necessarily the wrong thing. It's just, you're right. Fear is never the place we want to come from. You make bad decisions out of fear and guilt and things like that. Yeah. So counting the cost, even if fear is maybe the spark that gets you thinking about it, counting the cost, for sure. You have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I've already started having these conversations with my oldest. Even today, I said, you're going to have longer school days as you get into 7th and 8th and 9th grade. And and you're going to have to, sometimes you're going to have stuff you don't like to read. And sometimes you're going to have stuff that you're going to have to manage your time and get through and try not to get behind on things, because it counts more once you're, like you said, once you're trying to get transcripts for college or whatever it is that, God has planned for you, you're going to have to put in the work. And, coming out of high school, like you said, for fear, I can understand why some people would do that, but you do have to remember that there's still work that has to be done. And sometimes in those higher learning years, it's beyond even my thinking. So I'm preparing myself for that.
That's right. Resources, get your resources.
Yes.
Yeah. So also I saw parents who were just fearful and pulling them out 7th, 8th, 9th grade, thinking they could just plop them at their kitchen table and like, we're just going to do school. There you go. Here's your stuff. Thinking that they could just transition from a classroom to home like that. And they're going to go like work in their home office or do their thing. That is not going to work. You're going to have a big transition with a 7th grader, 6th grader, way more than you would if you took a kindergartner or 1st grader who had much experience of a classroom experience. So I would say if there's even more of a learning curve for you, for your child, you are really going to have to go back to previous points. Consider this your job and do the research and pray and beg God for wisdom to make it work, because it's not going to. It's not classroom now in the home. That's not what this is. Not what y'all are describing. Okay, so don't homeschool if you're not willing to pay for the curriculum, the tutors, or the classes your kids may need. Now, this is tricky because homeschool families are typically one income, so money is tighter. So we do count our pennies. How can we be wise in that way, Karen?
Well, you're right. You're exactly right. So I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial, and it's not intended, because I see what is going on at Harpeth Christian and I love it. And I love what Renée is doing. And I taught at a tutorial for 20 years, a 1 day a week. That was just a wonderful blessing, and it's still going on. But I would say, this is just my opinion, that you don't need tutors or classes for early grades, but high school is a different story. If you want your children to go to college. And again, I've seen thousands of families now homeschool and go through and with varying degrees of success. And so what I would like to tell you is that one of the main things as far as resources and being mindful that we're on one income is something that, so after we had graduated the first 3 and they had kind of gone on to do some pretty amazing things that God had planned for them, I felt like I need to write down what we did differently for my daughters and daughters-in-law, future daughters-in-law. And so that was the start of my book, that what did we do differently that worked. And then because we were in a place of leadership and a lot of visibility, I interviewed a lot of moms from really all over the US on when I would see their kiddos, and they were well-rounded, and they were exactly what y'all were saying about, you've got to be wise and be careful. And so anyway, I wrote down all that they did, and that's why I wrote the book, Go Fly a Kite. But I'm saying all this to say, one of the very best things that we did, and it was just, we fell into it. I mean, it was just, that was my love language. And so I did it a lot, and I didn't realize what a wonderful thing it was. And what a radical thing it was is every day of our homeschool, my homeschool, 34 years, every day we memorized and studied the Word of God. And I did a read aloud. I mean, great literature, great series. And I'm sitting here telling you, I was reading aloud to my 18-year-old son, my 16-year-old son, my 13-year-old daughter, and my newborn, thank you, that I was reading aloud, because it wasn't that they couldn't go off in a corner and read it to themselves. It was experiencing great nobility, great character builders, Consequences of Sin, just wonderful series together. We read aloud every day. And I'm just telling you, what happens is, again, this specter that sits over our shoulder going, you're leaving stuff out, you're leaving stuff out. You add another workbook. We spent too long on math. So we had to throw out the read aloud. And I'm telling you, do not do that. Start that. If that's all you do in the younger grades is teach them some counting and some sorting and you read aloud great books where they want to, like your son would say, Mom, teach me to read. That's the best thing we can do. So
yeah. So you don't have to spend a ton of money on curriculum, especially, you're right, especially in the younger years.
Yes.
We did Sunlight for all the younger.
Yes.
And which is tons of read aloud. I would have to work back up to that 2 or 3 hours of reading aloud.
Right. No.
That would be killing me now. But yes, in the high school years, you've got to be willing, like I got out of my depth with algebra. I had to go pay someone to tutor my daughter in algebra because she was falling behind. And I was like, I cannot have that. I can't just put you in front of a DVD, in the computer and just say, hey, let's call it good. If you need help, I need to pay for that help. And you're right. Yes. It's not that controversial. If you want to put your kid in 5th grade in a tutorial for a couple classes, that's fun. You got the money to do it. But yeah, you need to be able to count the cost, the actual, not just time, the actual money cost, and know that you're going to have to, don't just go for the free stuff and just because it's free. I mean, actually the great books probably are free.
They are.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, you need to go for excellence as much as you can. You have thoughts on that?
Some of the best advice that I got, and I pass on to anybody who will listen, was from a mom who had homeschooled 8 kids. And she was like you, she had a baby and a 20, she had been doing school for 20 years. She said in the elementary years, especially kindergarten through 3rd grade, she's like, teach them to read, teach them to write, do some simple math and just read. She was like, read books, listen to books. And that's what I tell people especially in elementary school, people that are pulling their kids out of public school and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to teach them all this stuff. And I'm like, you don't have to. Like, they don't have to learn all those things. They can play. They can sit and listen to you read a book, or they can listen to, my kids love, we use LibriVox. LibriVox is an app that is free. It has people who volunteer to read classic literature. My kids have listened to, I can't tell you how many books on LibriVox. At lunch every day, they sit and listen to whatever book they're listening to right then. I've utilized that with my middle daughter, who is like kind of auditory, needs to move learner. She will listen to her, the books that I would read aloud to her. Like sometimes some of them she listens to because she does better listening to someone else read them than me. I don't know why, but she does. And we use Charlotte Mason style of learning, and so we read a lot of books. And I get a lot of my books when I order books. You can get them free on some of these apps. I order them from different used book websites. Like it doesn't have to cost a whole lot of money. I think I ordered every single book for both of my girls for next year using a combination of things for less than $300. I mean,
wonderful.
There are ways to do it and get rich education and not have to spend a whole lot for elementary years. And then, yes, our daughter's going to tutorial for 7th grade, and it's just something you have to plan for and know that it's coming and make it a part of your life.
And really quick, this is not one of our points, but I do want to hit it before we hit the last 2. If you send your child to a tutorial, do you still have to work with them the other days, Karen?
Yes. Yes. No, but you and I both have probably seen the abuse of that, especially the high school kids, and they go, "Oh wow, I can take 6 classes at this tutorial." And so by the time that is piled on, then what you might want to do in your homeschool as far as whatever projects and what, it gets shoved to the back. So yeah, it is wonderful to have all the resources, right? We're so thankful to live nowadays where there are curriculum suppliers and tutorials, but you do just have to pray with wisdom and not, because again, I've seen families that when the kids would go to a high school tutorial, then they would tend to think what we do at home is just kind of
Yes.
Second class. It's not really that important now. And so we were always very careful to say, you're going to budget your time this afternoon, but we're still going to do what is important to this family in the early morning. So
yes, so true. That's good. All right. So number 9, don't homeschool if your spouse is totally against it. This seems self-evident, but were y'all on the same page always from the very beginning?
Well, okay, here's my motivation when I had a 4.5, 5-year-old. It was like, how badly can I screw up kindergarten? So it wasn't like I had this long-term vision of, let me just help, and I have to throw this in. The best thing about God calling us to homeschool and us both we really were both motivated to say, yeah, let's try this. We have no idea what the result will be. Honestly, there was nobody really to look at and say, hey, didn't they turn out awesome? I mean, Abraham Lincoln and Pearl Buck, but not anybody that we knew. And so just to say that, that right now we have 14 grandkids and they are all being homeschooled. And I just have to pinch myself to say, again, I told my daughters and daughters-in-law, there is absolutely no pressure. You have got to hear God for your family and not worry about what we did. But they all are, and it's just grace upon grace that I'm seeing these kids learn at their language on their level and learn together, and the cousins be able to get together and talk about homeschooling. So anyway, I would just say don't do anything that your spouse is totally against, much less something that requires total commitment and support from your mate. So
yes, spoken from the marriage and family therapist / homeschool veteran. Yeah, I mean, my husband was not totally on board when I first mentioned it, and we just said, okay, we're going to take a time of prayer and just pray about it. And it took about a month of that, and we came back together, and he was like, because he just had this idea, homeschoolers are weird. Okay, yeah, some of them are. Yeah, you're not wrong. And it's just too much on you, and all this.
Yes.
And so God brought our hearts together on that. And then he was my biggest cheerleader. There were days I couldn't have done it without him saying, you're doing a great job. I'm so pleased with, what's happening in our home during the day when I'm not here. And so anyway, you got to be a united team, especially on this one.
Renee, can I add one thing? I just thought about this, and it's one of the things that I did wrong that I really want to encourage others thinking about this. So when we were doing it, my dad was the one, and we had educators, out the wazoo on all sides of our family, and they really hadn't heard of homeschooling and thought we were out of our minds. And so what I did was I got this very legal, like a self-righteous attitude, like, well, we care more about our kids than, and so I was very just more in their face about, we're going to do this and you just watch and see. And it just was not beautiful in any sense of the word. And if I had to do it over again, if I had family members like your parents or your in-laws that are just going, what are y'all doing? I think I would approach it with humility and say, we heard about this. We've seen some good fruit, and we're going to try it for a year or two. We need y'all to pray with us, and we need you to look into our lives. And when you see our kids not reflecting the the fruits of the Spirit and not being a witness to Jesus, then come talk to us, because that way it made them more on our team instead of against. So anyway, it took a few years, and then finally they started seeing the fruit, and then they were like your husband, Renee. They were like, "Hey, we're all homeschoolers now." And I'm like, "Oh, really? Y'all are?" So, but anyway, the prayer part is so key. If you've got especially a spouse, is that if God can call you, he can call your husband. So I love that.
And that's such a beautiful, wise thing about, because I mean, I've had family members who are like, "You're what?" Especially people in education. I think sometimes they feel like it's an affront to their career choice, which I think is God honoring, and God calls people to all different places.
Yes.
And I want Christian educators, in every realm. And so it wasn't, but I got defensive like you. I made the same mistake, and I was just cross my arms and be like, "Stop giving my kid a spelling test at the dinner table," And it would make me angry. But instead of inviting them in, which is, you're right, wise words. What about you, Holly?
Like we kind of fell into homeschooling. We're blessed with, my husband has 2 brothers who homeschool their children, and they started before us.
Trailblazers.
We never really talked about it. My husband and I never really talked about it. But when our oldest was 4, she asked me to teach her to read. And we were doing like a little co-op at our church because we had just moved to the area, and for her to meet some of the kids at church and things like that. And so I was like, well, I guess I asked one of them, I was like, "What do I do to teach her to read?" And they were like, "Oh," they gave me some, things to do. And so my husband and I talked about it, and we were like, well, he's like, he was always like, "I think it's, a good idea." We had those, like, because we both went to school. So we had those things in the back of our head, those things that still come back and say, like you said, "Oh, you're not doing what they're doing," or whatever. But we were like, we're going to take this a year at a time, and we're going to pray about it, and we're going to ask God what he wants for our family. And a year at a time, we're just going to keep going until we reach a point where it doesn't work anymore or whatever. And like you said, Karen, he said the other day, he says at least once a week, he'll say, "I am so thankful that you are at home and you are teaching our kids," because he is, he works out in the world and he hears stories about school or about people's relationships with their kids or whatever. And he's like, "I'm so thankful that you're at home with them, that we do Bible every day. Yes. We have a prayer wall at our house. We pray. The kids write down their prayer requests on sticky notes, and we stick them up on the wall. And once a month, I take them down and put them in a notebook. But we pray together, and we're reading through the Bible together. And then the kids and I read through our Bible passage for the day. My husband reads it in the morning, and then we recap, or we talk about it. We listen to a podcast or whatever at night every day. And I mean, like, that is beautiful. And I tell the kids all the time, if we get that done every day and nothing else, then we have done.
Yes. Amen.
Oh, you're making me want to homeschool again. Oh, it's so beautiful. So beautiful. Okay. Number 10, our last one, don't homeschool if you are really concerned about what others think of you. Karen.
Well, if God calls you to a hard task, he will equip you. If you're obeying God, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And I would say, what an honor this has been to meet both you, Renee and Holly. And I'm learning from y'all right now. And I'm like, Renee, yes, if you could start over right now and use all the wisdom that we've used in the crucible. But I want to tell 2 last things that really didn't fit in any category, but it's not really that. I mean, I'm way beyond worried what people think about me, but as we're learning to be real and authentic, I ended up having to apologize to my kids. I mean, it seemed like every week. Maybe it was every 2 weeks, because I'd have a bad day or I'd be impatient or, whatever. And I want to encourage moms to realize we're doing the best we can moving forward. Like Holly said, a year at a time, evaluating, praying, is this working? But be willing to apologize to your kids because it is about relationship. It is about relationship going forward. And the other just real practical thing, and I had to do it back in the day, and now these young moms have to do it, is do not answer or text on your phone during the school morning, because what you're basically saying is, oh, I'm going to put y'all on hold because this is more important. And they are going to read that loud and clear. And so just don't have it in the schoolroom or have it on silent, and just self-discipline yourself to make those first morning hours really precious and really stress-free. So,
boundaries with technology. Yes. It's a blessing, and it can be a real problem. So, all right. If you're really concerned about what others think of you, don't homeschool.
Yeah, I have run into the same. We kind of touched on this, people who are teachers or people who, feel like your kids are homeschool kids don't learn as much, and they don't, they're not socialized and all these things. You just kind of have to, like you said, it's what God, has called for your family. Like, it really doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. And when I get those kind of questions, I say, go and ask, go and talk to my almost 13-year-old and see if you feel like she doesn't know how to interact with people, or feel free, she might not have memorized a bunch of facts about a war, but she can tell you about lots of things. She's a very avid reader. She reads books that she was reading, really thick books when she was 8, and people were shocked at, she's read books that her friends haven't read, and they're like, I don't even know, so she's all the time runs into people. Do you know, Mom, that so-and-so hasn't even read, like this? And I'm like, well, so, it's just one of those things where what's best for your kids and for your family. And, you have to get past that, like, comparing is the thief.
Amen.
Always. But I have to come to terms with that, like, especially in the world we live in with Instagram and Facebook and all these things where people are posting pictures of their homeschool rooms and their curriculums and all these things. It's like, you have to look at those things and see the beauty, but also know that not everyone does that as a homeschooler.
Amen.
And that we do have bad days. And I have learned apologizing to your kids for getting frustrated over, why can't you remember how to do this math problem? I had to do that.
That never happened to me. Never.
No. I had to do that so many times. Like, I'm so sorry. I know you're doing your best. Like, you're having a bad day. I'm having a bad day. It just happens. And homeschool is not pretty all the time.
Amen.
It isn't, like you said, it is a crucible for your character. I thought I was a nice person, really nice person. And I had a baby. And then I was like, I'm actually kind of selfish and grouchy. Then you get past that, and you learn, you repent. Then you decide to homeschool. And you're like, wow, I thought we taken care of that. So yeah. And I think as Christians, we're just going to have to be okay with being weird. I mean, our way of life, our worldview is increasingly odd.
Our views on school.
Yes, they're increasingly odd. And so we're very countercultural anyway as Christ followers.
Yes.
So homeschooling is just another little, just be okay with being weird. Although with the numbers increasing like they are, it's not so much of a minority as it used to be. So thank you, ladies. This has been so fun. Probably one of my favorite interviews. Because I just love this topic. So I hope that this has been helpful, listeners and watchers, that we've given you some food for thought about if you are going to homeschool, if you're praying about homeschooling. Ministers, if you have people in your congregation who are thinking about homeschooling, it really is worth counting the cost, pressing in prayer. And it's such a blessed path to walk. And so if that's what God's calling you to, I'd hate for you to miss it, because it's a beautiful journey. It's a beautiful journey. So thanks. And we'll see you next time on Real Life Theology.